sometimes their retaliation is then much more limited in a way that signals. I suspect that Ayatollah Khamenei will have to respond simply because his own legitimacy is so tied to this nuclear program. I would be much more worried about a shopping mall in Dallas, Texas, or in Iowa than I would be about the US base in Bahrain or Qatar.
Michael Rubin, thank you so much for talking to ANI. This is a major breaking news story right now. The US has struck 3 nuclear sites in Iran. How will you see Iran respond to the direct US strikes on its nuclear facilities?
Well, Iran oftentimes will react with bluster. However, sometimes their retaliation is then much more limited in a way that signals that they don't want this to go too much further. That said, I suspect that Ayatollah Khamenei will have to respond simply because his own legitimacy is so tied to this nuclear program. Beyond that, we hear a lot of talk about American bases in the region, whether they could become targeted. I don't think the Iranians are going to retaliate in a way that we expect. I would be much more worried about a shopping mall in Dallas, Texas, or in Iowa than I would be about the US base in Bahrain or Qatar.
Right. Now, President Trump is going to address the nation at 10 p.m. Shortly from now. What are you expecting, and your reaction to this, to how this is all played out?
Donald Trump is certainly going to talk about how successful Donald Trump is. That's simply the way he acts. He probably will try to put out an olive branch to say that this doesn't really need to go too much further, that the Iranians need to step down. However, he will repeat his demand that they unconditionally surrender their nuclear program. Now, that may seem extreme, but remember, we've had situations like this before. In 1991, South Africa, which was still at the tail end of its apartheid regime at the time, decided to come clean and give up not only its covert program, but its nuclear weapons that it had built. And it took the International Atomic Energy Agency 19 years then to certify that its disarmament was complete. Also in 2003, when Muammar Gaddafi decided to give up his chemical and biological weapons program, he actually allowed American and British intelligence to come into Libya in order to dismantle the factories and ship them out of the country. We wanted to do that before he changed his mind. The question now is anyone going to be willing to do that with regard to Iran's nuclear program and nuclear material? Frankly, I think this is where India could step forward, because India is the only country in the world that is trusted by the United States, by Israel, and by Iran.
Right. You talked about Iran's nuclear program and its capabilities. What are the implications for this program, the timeline, and what can happen next?
Well, the biggest danger was that if you had the core of the nuclear program remain in Fordo, underground, that Iran could reconstitute this. Now, how quickly they could reconstitute the program would depend on how they were reconstituting it. If they were doing it alone, it could be years. If they were using Chinese, North Korean, Pakistani, and Russian scientists, it could be a matter of months. Now, however, it's going to be much harder for Iran to reconstitute that program, and ordinary Iranians are going to be asking, why is it that we had to suffer such deprivation for the last 3 decades for a nuclear program, which now no longer exists? Is this a wise investment for the regime to continue when we're having trouble putting food on our table and rebuilding our country?
Michael, how does this really change the regional balance of power and alliance structures vis-a-vis US, Israel, Iran, China, Russia?
Well, first of all, Osama bin Laden once quipped that everybody loves a strong horse. For too long, the United States acted like a gelded pony. We were sincere often in our diplomacy, but when Americans look at diplomacy, it's about solving problems. When many other peoples in the world look at diplomacy, again, I'm thinking about the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, it's an asymmetric warfare strategy in order to run down the clock. Now that the United States has done this, in essence, what we have done is reestablish our deterrence. When the United States speaks now and in the future, different countries are going to have no choice but to listen. And I'll bet you the people who are staying up late tonight, having trouble sleeping, are probably the North Koreans. Although do need to be clear, there's absolutely no intention to repeat this in North Korea.
Right. What could be the implications for regional proxies, the Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iraqi militias?
Well, when it comes to the Houthis, when it comes to Hezbollah, you have a situation where they are now essentially orphaned. The question then becomes, are they going to be allowed to wither away? Or will another country, like Turkey or Pakistan, decide to try to rescue them for their own aims? I wouldn't be surprised to see both Turkey and Pakistan try to reach out and gain whatever capabilities and capacities they can get from Hezbollah and the Houthis. When it comes to the Iraqi militias, the Iraqi government, as much as it's been supportive of Iran rhetorically, has been very careful about ensuring that its militias stay in the barracks and don't draw the country in. Now, on June 13th, and again on June 19th, Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani gave a major speech, a statement, in which he condemned Israel and sided with Iran. His most recent statement, however, was all about the need to work through religious and legal norms. Frankly, given the traditional competition between Najaf in Iraq and Qum in Iran, I'm sure Grand Ayatollah Sistani is saying certain things, but behind the scenes he's smiling at the downfall of his chief competitor, Ali Khamenei.
Right. Now, do you see any diplomatic off-ramps that still exist to prevent further escalation, or you think it's going to be a full-fledged war?
No, I don't think it will be a full-fledged war. I suspect the Europeans, the United Nations, and maybe even Donald Trump himself are going to try to offer Iran an off-ramp to stand down. And again, Donald Trump has made clear that it's not the U.S. desire to decapitate Iran's leadership. While the Israelis may want to get rid of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and have regime change, the United States policy is not to do that. In fact, the United States wants to keep Ayatollah Khamenei alive, if for no other reason than if there is a formal surrender, they want someone to sign the surrender and turn over power to a provisional authority so that no vacuum comes to exist. So when it comes to an off-ramp, yes, there will be an off-ramp. Again, let's also remember in 1988, Ayatollah Khomeini decided to have a ceasefire in the Iran-Iraq war, something he swore he was never going to accept. He got on the radio and he said, it's like drinking from a chalice of poison, but I have no choice but to drink from this cup if I want the Islamic Republic to survive. The question for Khamenei right now is which is more important, his ego or the survival of his regime? Certainly, however, the U.S. policy is going to be he needs to drink from that chalice of poison.
Right. Now, how might this impact the oil markets and the global economy, and especially the Strait of Hormuz? If Iran closes that, does that have an impact on India?
Well, 44% of the fuel that goes through the Strait of Hormuz ends up in Asia, most of that in China, but also to some degree in India. And so there might be a short disruption. However, there is an ability to have alternate supply. The United States is a major supplier right now. Saudi Arabia can ship fuel across the Arabian Peninsula to Yanbu. The United Arab Emirates have a pipeline that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz and goes into the Gulf of Oman. Also, remember that Iran needs to import gasoline. And so while the Iranians rhetorically might talk about closing the Strait of Hormuz, militarily they're not able to do that for more than about a day. Beyond that, they would be committing suicide. Their own economy, their own military would wither away should they try to close the Strait of Hormuz. Back in April and October 2024, when you had the Iranian missile strikes on Israel and the Israeli retaliation, the Iranians briefly started exporting some of their oil through Jask, which of course is also like Chabahar, outside the Strait of Hormuz. However, the latest statistics I've seen is that they didn't replenish their storage capacity after they exported that oil. And when they were doing that, they were not exporting more than 100,000 barrels per day through Jask. So the Iranians are going to be the ones who suffer the most. There might be a spike in oil prices, but I don't suspect it's going to last for more than 3 or 4 days, given that so many other countries have spare capacity.
Right. Now, how will this really impact Iran's relationship with Russia and China? What do you see?
Well, China's concern, of course, is that they're reliant on Iran and the Persian Gulf for so much of their oil and their liquefied natural gas. When it comes to Russia, Russia is going to be able to rhetorically support Iran, but they've got their hands full with Ukraine. I mean, in a sense, just like Iran cut Hezbollah loose, Russia cut Bashar al-Assad loose. And Russia may have no choice but to do something similar with the Islamic Republic of Iran. It would not surprise me if we see an end of the Islamic Republic. It would surprise me if we see a democracy form in its place. I suspect what we might end up seeing is a military coup on the part of certain factions within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that might try to strike a deal. Iranian sovereignty for Iranian non-aggression.
Right. Just moving on from this topic about Pakistan formally recommending U.S. President Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. What happens here with all this happening?
You know, the United States, it's likely that some of the U.S. operation was discussed with Asim Munir. Maybe not in detail, but maybe something to the effect of passing some messages to Iran or talking about the possibility of overflights. Perhaps it was put in the context of reconnaissance rather than military attacks. And also, one of the things we also likely discussed with Pakistan was, should there be any damage to U.S. aircraft, ability of the U.S. aircraft to land inside Pakistan. Honestly, in 2003, when we started the Iraq War, we made a similar deal, ironically with Iran itself, that American planes could land on Iranian airfields and that the planes and the pilots wouldn't be molested. That said, there is a pattern in American-Pakistani relations where we will offer Pakistan incentives when we need them. And as soon as we stop needing them, then we stop being so generous. It wouldn't surprise me to see that pattern repeat here. And frankly, Pakistan knows when they deal with the United States, we are fair weather friends. Historically, when after the partition of India, wanted to ally with India. India, Nehru, didn't want to ally with the United States. He wanted to go non-aligned. And so Pakistan was our second choice. It was almost like asking the pretty girl to the prom, getting rejected, and then going to with the ugly girl instead. Well, Pakistan is used to us playing these games, and they should continue to be used to it because India, frankly, is a much more important country.